Ladies and gentlemen, may I now introduce OculusIT.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this iSeminar today. Today, we will speak with Chad Gaines, who will share with us how migrating to Microsoft Office 365 benefited his campus at Central Methodist University. Our agenda for today includes the following. I will provide an overview of OculusIT, and then we will hear from Chad about the Office 365 migration at his campus, upon which, once he completes, we will have a question and answer session for all of our attendees. You may enter your questions throughout the presentation in the right-hand panel where it shows the question box. And so just type your questions there and we will answer them at the conclusion of the presentation. OculusIT is a leader for higher education and government-focused IT managed and cloud services. We provide tailored solutions to organizations of all sizes. We operate 24 hours a day, 7 days out of the week, and 365 days out of the year in order to provide increased efficiency, minimal downtime, and reduced cost to our customers. Our values include trust, integrity, clients first, accountability, respect, competency, and transparency. Some of our professional services include cloud hosting, remote hosting and backup services, disaster recovery on the cloud. We provide virtual desktop infrastructures and remote monitoring services. As you can see, the depth and breadth of our services are utilized by many clients and many customers, community colleges, state universities, and research institutions. Our customers are in 35 states, and we have more than 250 institutions to which we have provided services. Today, we are offering 2 promotions to attendees of this webinar. The first is we will migrate your Office 365 environment for you. This plan includes an upgrade from DirSync to the Azure AD Connect, and this will cover all of your Office 365 applications. The pricing for this service starts at $999. This is a great value for your money. On promotion 2, in addition to the migration, we will also audit your Office environment for you. We will do a complete audit of your Active Directory and Exchange environments, looking for mailboxes that are oversized, corruptions. We will also review Active Directory for inactive and accounts or accounts that have not been logged in for an extended period of time. And we'll review the organizational units and GPO policies within your Active Directory environment. This audit with the migration begins at a cost of $9,750. So at this time, I would like to introduce our guest speaker, Chad Gaines. Chad is the Vice President for Technology and Planning at Central Methodist University located in Fayette, Missouri. He holds a master's degree in computer information systems and has experience in both the public and private sectors. Chad has been in higher education for more than 20 years and has been in his current role for over 10 years now. He enjoys attending car shows, loves anything Star Wars, and is a dedicated family man, and he believes that the time he spends with his family is the most important key to a quality life. Chad, I will now turn over the platform to you. May the force be with you.
Well, thank you, Virginia, and thanks everyone today for spending some time with us to learn a little bit more about our Office 365 project. It's great to have an opportunity to actually share some of our experiences with, quote, the move to the cloud, and thus our reason for partnering with OculusIT. So to start things off, you'll see this slide here. I think it's important just to give everybody kind of an idea of, who Central Methodist is. Like I said, our main campus is located in Fayette, Missouri. It's a residential campus of about 1,100 students, and we have multiple locations throughout the state of Missouri, and a very robust online program with students from various states. So we serve what I would consider, your traditional students, plus a number of non-traditional students across the areas. All right, so when you're looking to possibly make a move to the cloud, to an Office 365 type environment, here's kind of the things we were considering as we were looking at that whole thing. Historically, Central had always housed an on-premise Exchange server. I mean, our first Exchange server on campus was like Exchange version 5. So we had been with Exchange for a long time, had a great deal of comfort level with our Exchange on-premise server. But at the same time, if you're very familiar with Microsoft, typically they're on about a 3-year cycle when they come out with a new edition of Exchange. And although they say, well, you upgrade to Exchange, it's really never about upgrading. With Exchange, it's really a migration. I don't care if you're on-premise or to the cloud. I mean, if you're on-premise, you have to provision a new server, do a fresh install of Exchange, and then you actually migrate mailboxes over to that new system. And so we were in a situation where we were kind of getting ready, looking at that upgrade. Do we want to upgrade to the latest version of Exchange, or is this the time? Is this the time we need to look to moving to Office 365 cloud version of email? So as we're kind of weighing things out, it's like, what? We understand the benefits of the cloud. We see its great potential. The challenge is, I've got a staff of 7 people that support all of our constituents. I mean, we're talking, we support PCs, we support network, learning management systems, all those things in higher ed that all of us do, 7 total people. So adding another thing to their plate in already a project-intensive type environment seemed a little daunting, especially in this area when there's so many things to consider, not only the technology, the security aspects, and things like that. So along with that, in all cases, we want to make sure we had kind of the best practice setup. What is the role model setup for an Office 365 environment if we're going that way? Because I've always felt in our role, it's tough for a staff of my size, kind of like if you equate it to cars, it's hard to kind of build the engine, right? But man, once you have the engine up, it's a lot easier for you to kind of keep it tuned up. So we felt we needed to find somebody who could help us kind of build that engine, and then they could hand over the keys to us, and we'd make sure it's tuned up. Another thing, of course, as we looked, weighed the decision whether or not to stick with an on-premise system or move to the cloud was this whole thing with versions. I mentioned it before, Microsoft's on about a 3-year cycle for versions. So with a staff of my size, you have to have somebody who can keep up to date with the technology, the management, administration of the Exchange server, and things like that. So that was kind of another daunting thing that we were looking at. The other piece, of course, we had a storage area network. Exchange, especially with the expectations that your constituents bring to the table, because they're used to having a Gmail account, a Yahoo account, an Outlook account, those types of things. Their expectation for storage and capabilities was far surpassed what we were able to provide through an on-premise system. In addition, SANs are notoriously, they work very well, right? Performance is great, and you need great performance when you have an Exchange, on-premise Exchange server, because it's so I/O intensive. But that storage is also very expensive to have. So moving to Office 365, we're going to push that storage off out in the cloud and off our premise. So we kind of saw that as we can take some of that storage back and use it for other things on campus. And then kind of as I alluded to, we had some very large mailboxes with a lot of items we had to look at and and think about how we're going to make those conversions happen. One thing that we did have in our favor, on campus, faculty and staff, they use Microsoft Outlook as the client to check their email. And one thing we did have in our favor was we did not use what was known as PSTs. It's like an offline mail folder. So that really worked to our advantage as we were migrating, actually when we made the migration. Okay, so like you would do, or you are doing, you need to look at options. You might be at the crossroads. You might be one of those people that have an on-premise Exchange server, and you're thinking, should I move to Office 365? Well, in our case, we said, okay, do we just get the latest and greatest Microsoft Exchange server and install it in-house on-premise like we always have? Do we make the move to a cloud-based service like Office 365 and find a local vendor, local partner that can help us with that process? Or do we partner with an OculusIT? And obviously our choice was Oculus. And you might ask, well, what are some of the reasons that went in, what went into that decision-making process? Well, as a person who's ultimately responsible for the IT budget here, when you go to the budget table and you're talking to the team, they like to know, okay, what are the exact costs it's going to take to get this migration done. What I found with Oculus is it's kind of like you get the no dicker sticker, right? I mean, you get this. They had a fixed cost system, so I knew up front this was what the cost was going to be. What I found with some other vendors, I could not kind of tone into that. They would give me a range, and normally what I found in my past experience, when they give you a range, when it's all said and done, you might as well know it's going to be at the top end of that range or even surpass the total that they quoted. So that was one thing that weighed heavily. I really liked knowing what my final cost was going to be for the project. And then as Oculus IT and I got in discussions and talked about the implementation, again, with not being totally familiar and comfortable with the Office 365 environment, how all that works, when they're kind of talking about how the implementation would go, I was just amazed at how they felt things would progress and how fast they could go. And so that was another very nice thing to have. Of course, adaptive. What you'll find, or at least again in my experience, with especially as you compare, let's say, an Oculus IT to a local Microsoft provider, some of those providers, what they'll have is like one or two people that may be very well educated or trained on an Office 365 type migration, but that's as far as it goes. You got one or two people. With Oculus, they got a lot more resources available to them, and that is important. And the last thing, the timeline focused implementations. All of us in IT, we have like 1,000 things we need to do, right? And it's important to kind of know, okay, what would the timeline look at? So they talked with us, they helped kind of us work out a timeline. We knew what the timeline was in advance. We could then plan scheduling. We could plan a whole communication plan around what the timeline says. So that was immense help. And they, like I said, the project manager with that took care of all that for us and led that for us. Okay, so the other thing is, what was the scope? What did that scope of that migration look like for us? So I'm not going to go through all of these, but here's kind of gives you an idea of what you see on the screen there of the scope of the project itself. Important. One thing I will mention, again, I'm not into reading slides, but on that very last point, submission of basic standard operating procedures document or SOP document, I want to tell you how valuable that is. When you're moving to, for us, I mean, it was a shift. You're going from an institution that had an on-premise Exchange server for years, right? Then you're making this big shift to the cloud. Your whole procedures and how you administer, how you operate change. And as an example, at the time, when you set up an account in your Active Directory, because we're a Microsoft Windows environment, there was a synchronization process that had to take place. And Microsoft had like a default of like 4 hours. So unless you manually ran this step or set up a script to do this, it was something that just had to be thought about. Well, those details like that were covered in that standard operating procedures document, and it was just immensely helpful, and that's just kind of one example. But this kind of gives you an idea of the magnitude of an implementation and a migration to Office 365. Okay, here's kind of a rough outline of what the project plan looked like. As you can see from the plan itself, you know, it was a little over 6 weeks. And you got to figure we had roughly about 3,000, 3,500 mailboxes, if memory serves me correctly. That's a combination of faculty, staff, and students. So we had a number of things to bring across. During the migration process, you'll see that kind of gray bar there. That was interesting in itself, because with this, you have this little utility that helps you move your mailboxes from your on-premise Exchange server out to the cloud. And it was so cool because we would just tell people, okay, you know, if your last name begins with A through C, we're going to start migrating you at this time. And literally, they were so ecstatic when they finally got migrated over and had all of these new tools and bells and whistles available to them. I mean, we went from an institution where the faculty staff had roughly 1 gig of email storage to 1 terabyte. You know, students had 500 megabytes of storage and went to 1 terabyte. So I mean, it was a major shift. So because we took faculty, staff, and students out to the Office 365 environment. This gives you kind of an idea of the actual hours involved. And again, some people may look at this, depending on the size of the institution, say, well, you know, it's 250 hours. You know, we could handle 250 hours in-house. You know, I don't know. It's just very hard in some environments because your time and attention can get diverted so easy. And I always had great comfort knowing that when my staff went home at 5 or 6 o'clock at night, there's somebody working on this project that we need to get done. And that's really, when you look at that little over 6 week process, I just knew that stuff didn't stop at 5 o'clock. I mean, there were people working on this all the time, seemingly. Okay, this one, again, I'm not a real tech, but just kind of I am a visual person in some ways, so let me try to outline this for you. In the top left-hand corner, just pretend like that's our Office 365 cloud environment where all of our email and everything are kind of stored. And on the lower right-hand side, you see our Active Directory. So that's our on-premise Active Directory environment. That's the master authentication. That's our master address book for campus that's maintained in-house. And then between all that, we have a process that keeps the Active Directory synced with the cloud with that little sync tool. And then we use something that Microsoft came out with called Active Directory Federation Services that kind of manages the sign-on and authentication process. Again, that's modeled after a best practice, and that's something that OculusIT helped us get set up and running. So, you know, from an outcome perspective, you know, we got migrated over to Office 365. And that was really a big deal for us, obviously, coming from our current on-premise environment and considering the staff we did and considering the time frame we did it in. I mean, I told the team here I was just really impressed, and I was impressed by the service we received from OculusIT. In addition, you know, at the end of the day, I knew I didn't have to worry about any more on-premise Exchange upgrades. So that was comforting. But some of the lessons we learned in the process, pilot group testing. I know in IT we talk a lot about having some pilot project. Some people tend to ignore those. I would suggest not to ignore those. We start off migrating or testing some of our communication plans out with a smaller group of people, because what we found is when we were kind of laying out instructions and how-tos and things people needed to do, we found some gaps, some holes we needed to fill. So by working with that pilot group, we kind of shored up some of our messaging, so it reduced the amount of follow-up phone calls or questions people might have. In addition, I mentioned our faculty staff, they used Microsoft Outlook as the client. Well, when you go from having an Exchange server that's on your local network to a cloud-based system that's out on the internet, the speed difference between when you get your mail, how that process happens, is very different. So we figured out very quickly. We set up a little flag on our Microsoft Outlook client to actually cache a local copy of email on the individual's PC to help with performance. So that was one little thing that we kind of worked out with the pilot group process. The other piece is, of course, documentation. You know, you gotta think about, okay, how's your operating procedures change? So Oculus, they provide some. You'll want to develop some in-house. For instance, especially in this day and age, everybody has smartphones, smart devices, this and that. They may need to go redirect or point their systems to some other URL. You'll have to think about, okay, what does that mean? How am I going to get that message out to people? And there are just some people that no matter how well you do at documenting or describing what needs to happen, they just need somebody to kind of hold their hand. And you will have some of that. The other piece that I would kind of advise you on is, you know, kind of grow into the new features. I kind of focused and talked a little bit about just the email aspect of it, okay? But Office 365 is so much more than email. It has OneDrive, which is the cloud-based storage. It's got all the, if you got a Microsoft Office license, you have the cloud-based versions of Word, Excel, PowerPoint. They have this really cool, it's like their version of Facebook called Yammer that they come out with. They've got a module called Video, so constituents can actually upload videos and store videos out there within the Office 365 environment. And of course, Skype, one of the premier messaging platforms, is all part of that Office 365 suite. So while I've talked a lot about email, there's a whole ton of other features that your users would have access to. And you got to think, okay, first we kind of took the approach, let's get everybody up on email, let's get all those questions answered. And then what we did is about 3 months after that, then we came back and started hitting training on, okay, here's what OneDrive is, you know, here's how you can access it, here's the capabilities of what you can do. You know, you can now share documents. You don't have to contact IT anymore and say, set up a shared folder on this server. The user can actually do that from their end. And then in addition, you've got access to all the apps at the Play Store or the App Store that are freely available, that work with OneDrive, that work with Word, all of these things. So there's a ton of things like that. In addition, with the Office 365 environment, you have actually an admin app that you can put on your phone. And so we actually migrated some of our email boxes from our phone. And so it's a pretty robust little app they have just to administer your Office 365 environment. And the last thing is you know, make sure you got somebody you trust to pull you through on a project like this. That's very crucial. Someone, you know, if you run into a snag, they're going to help bail you out. And next slide. I'll turn it over.
Well, thank you so much, Chad, for sharing your experience with our visitors and with our team today. And I'm particularly thankful for you sharing some of the lessons learned as it relates to doing the pilot with your users. I think the years of experience that you have in higher education are definitely evident in some of the best practices you follow in ensuring that your campus stakeholders are well served throughout the process. I would like to, so thank you so much. I would like to, it seems like we have a couple of questions that have come up, and one of the questions that our attendees have for you is, how did you handle maintaining shared calendars if you were doing moves by last name rather than logical working groups?
That's a great question. What we did is on the migration process, like students, we didn't really have that concern, number one. So we had less than 500 mailboxes associated with faculty staff, which were the people that would have had shared calendars. So In some cases, let's say for the executive team, for instance, so they're over different areas. You got the president, enrollment person, advancement, etc. We tried to migrate those at the same time for that very reason, because there is an interval in there where if you have somebody that's out in the cloud and somebody's on premise, it's not going to work exactly as you would like. So for cases like that, we tried to migrate groups of people together versus last name. And then two, the migration process that we had, it actually goes pretty quick. So basically, you kind of set the expectation at the beginning, saying, look, we're going to start moving staff over from this time to this time, and maybe it's 3 days that it takes to get that done. As long as I think you set that expectation, they're willing to live with it, knowing what light is at the end of the tunnel.
Awesome, thank you. One of the other questions that has come up is, are you running in a hybrid mode? Did you decide, in other words, to keep one Exchange server on site? And if so, what is that server doing?
Okay, so for us, we basically ran in a hybrid mode until we had that last mailbox converted, and then everything we have is out in the cloud. Well, we did not want to maintain on-premise Exchange server. We wanted to, and it's a philosophy from my standpoint. I'm kind of like, I think things are moving toward, we're going to manage, instead of managing servers, we're going to manage services. And so that was kind of the reason we said, you know what, we will not have an on-premise Exchange server. We'll just leave it Office 365 to handle all of that.
Can you share other factors, maybe from the standpoint of your higher administrators, executive administrators, some perspectives you learned on their mailbox migrations? Those tend to be the largest in higher education.
Yeah, they were. But for that group of people, they are some of the largest. And like our CFO, for example, she was notorious. I mean, it's like she used her mailbox as like a big electronic file cabinet. And when we moved to Office 365, we never had to call her and say, look, your mailbox is getting too full. Those things like that, all that kind of went away. And then once you get past this email conversion and you start introducing all these other tools in the Office 365 ecosystem, they really get excited. I mean, I know many of you probably use Skype firsthand. That's just part of it. They use their .edu address when they log into the thing. It's easy to set up a meeting. The OneDrive storage, when they know they can, when your executive team knows they can go be sitting in an airport and access some file that they need to, that's back, quote, they used to have to VPN or do something fancy and to get access to, that they can actually access that file through an app at an airport. I mean, it's kind of a slam dunk.
Awesome, awesome. So there's another question here where one of our participants would like to know if you also implemented OneDrive at the same time for your faculty and for the employees. And part two of that question is, did the transfer of those files happen as a part of the migration process?
Okay, so all those, OneDrive, it was a feature of Office 365, and it was enabled when we migrated. So if somebody knew how to find it, they could actually get to it. We didn't really encourage use of it until about 3 months in, and we had some training sessions on, like I think one of the training sessions was like Survive with OneDrive, and we kind of got people orientated toward what it can do for you. So it wasn't something we did right at first. But it's something 3 months later we started trying to reinforce, because it is a very, very nice feature. So hope that answered that question.
Okay, and that brings up also another question of some of the pointers of your communication plan. You mentioned earlier that by OculusIT taking some of the work on the configuration, it helped you in being able to spend time more on the communication plan. Can you share with our audience some of the pointers that you think are critical in a communication plan for a migration of this type?
I think people, even if you had some bumps in the road, I think people, as long as they know what the end goal looks like. So what we tried to enforce was, hey folks, this is where we're making this transition. here's the reasons why. For example, your mailbox, you have this option, you have this option now. With this, once we make the move, you got a plethora of other options that are going to be available to you. So you're not taking a step back, you're taking like a giant leap forward in the capabilities that you're going to have. So in this mobile me environment that we're all in, when 80+% of the college students nowadays have some type of smartphone, we're making sure we're giving them the tools to be successful. So, number one, we need to communicate that message. We're in a little bit of a different situation because, we do have our residential campus here, plus a bunch of students that never step foot on this campus. So we used a combination of mailers. We used email when we could. We made flyers. I mean, we probably in some ways over-communicated, but nobody can say we did not communicate.
Awesome. And I think that's a very nice tip. Taking a giant leap forward for students is just a reminder a lot of times for us in the service side of higher education that the student success is one of those ways that we can help gain buy-in from the constituency. Another question that came up was encountering any issues during the migration. Were there issues that were discovered during the implementation process, and were there issues identified during post-migration?
Probably the one issue post-migration was the performance in Outlook. We had to figure out, we had to turn on in Outlook, there's this little checkbox, and you say cache your email. That kind of resolved, especially from older computers that had slower hard drives and things like that. That helped from a performance standpoint. So it's called Microsoft, like it's in Outlook, it's a setting cached exchange mode. We turned that on. The other thing that we ran into prior to actually doing any migration is we did opt to have Oculus do an Active Directory audit, which is part of this process we looked at. And again, we have historically been a Microsoft, I'm a Microsoft guy, and we've been a Microsoft institution really since I've been here, 20+ years. So we had Active Directory accounts. I've got people that's been here 25+ years. So we've had these Active Directory accounts that are old, right? And we've been through various Microsoft server migrations. So we opted to have Oculus do a health check kind of on our Active Directory environment to make sure to avoid any kind of potential issues with accounts or configuration pitfalls. And there were a few minor things that they found that we were able to correct prior to the implementation, whereas I think if we did not do that step, we would have had a problem during the migration that, maybe put us a little further behind than what we wanted to be. So those are probably two things that come to my mind.
Okay, great. And the other question was on your Active Directory Federation services. Are you hosting ADFS on-premise, or did you leave ADFS in the cloud? What was the decision for Central Methodist?
Okay, so at the time, Microsoft really didn't have what I considered a robust cloud-based version for ADFS. So right now, what we have, we host ADFS. So we have 3 servers on campus. We have a directory synchronization server that, again, if you think about that little chart, it keeps the accounts in our Active Directory synced with the cloud. And that actually runs, Microsoft tweaked that, so it syncs every 30 minutes automatically.
Okay.
And then 2, we have we have an ADFS server and then a proxy server that sits in front of that, because that is best practice. So again, our ADFS is hosted in-house.
Okay, great. So the next question is regarding backups. Are you doing any other backups of the mailboxes, or are you trusting for the backups to occur in the cloud?
I'm trusting Microsoft.
Yeah.
And they've kind of been in, they've been in this business for a lot of years. They provide this, it's not their, Central necessarily wasn't a pioneer when we made the move to the cloud. There's some other institutions that obviously beat us to it. Mm-hmm. And so we don't worry about backups.
Okay. That kind of brings up another question in the sense that, were you able to increase the mailbox size allocation for faculty, staff, and students once you went to the cloud?
Yeah, by default. I mean, when they had, again, faculty staff had 1 gig, which, we thought, well, that was just great. Well, they had like something like a terabyte now. It's something, I mean, it's like my CFO had the biggest mailbox and she's only like 40% full right now. I mean, it's crazy how much space you'd have. I mean, she could email herself every minute and things are going to be fine. It's just a gigantic jump forward. I mean, there's no way when you think about as a higher ed institution, how could I provide that same level of services to our constituents that Microsoft Office 365 offers? I mean, you could technically, yeah, but you would go broke trying, and that's kind of the way I look at it. Is like this is, from a business standpoint, this seems like the right thing to do, and ironically, most like our web-based email, which used to get used extensively, people don't use that much because they're accessing their email off their phone. I mean, I could probably take our web-based email offline now, and we may not get a call for 30 minutes. I mean, it's that's how things transition with your users. Again, because they're using their mobile devices now, and Office 365 works so great with that.
And so on that, kind of backing up to another question, Chad, here, you mentioned the caching for the clients, and so the initial download, was that the most painful part of getting a mailbox set up or getting the mail on the client's PCs?
Actually, that was not, no, I'd say no. That wasn't too bad. It was kind of a find we had kind of as we were looking at performance, because I guess the thing to do, if we had everybody at 8 o'clock in the morning click that button and everybody do it at the same time, it would probably have been a performance issue. But that just wasn't the case. We were able to kind of stagger things out when we did that. But it will be, I mean, the performance will be impacted by the speed of that PC it's on. I mean, if you got an older, like a 5-year-old PC, it's got a slower hard drive in it. I mean, it's going to take a little bit, but once that caching is in place, it's worked really well.
Okay. And so another question that's come up is legal compliance issues. What are you doing to address that in the cloud, or have any issues come up on compliance?
We have not ran into any issues that come up related to compliance. I can tell you the admin console with Office 365 has a plethora of options that you can do. I mean, essentially it's like having your Exchange server on premise, but it's all this web-based interface you're using. And so you can set up all those little redirects, holds, those things like that, all through the admin panel if you need to. So there's a ton of capabilities within that admin interface of Office 365 that has some just nice features.
Okay, so does that include the ability to kind of search for emails, maybe for an open records request or something of that nature?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it's very robust. I mean, again, my experience at the end of the time was Exchange 2010. This has a ton more capabilities than I ever had with that version of Exchange.
So I think I know the answer to this next question, but I want to kind of see what your thought is. It's about the legal hold. So if the backup is occurring, is it a time limit based maintenance of the mailbox, or is it based on the storage size? So how long is Microsoft keeping a backup or keeping those mailboxes intact for you?
If I delete a message, I think it's set 30 days.
Okay.
I can go back 30 days, and that might be even something you can even configure. So if somebody deletes a message and it doesn't show up in their Outlook anymore, their mailbox anymore, it's really not totally gone. As an admin, you can actually go back and pull that message back.
Okay. And how many engineers or do you have dedicated on your team to managing O365, or do you even have
listen, I've got our help desk, so they're in a very customer service role. We make sure they know how the process to set accounts up, and then typically if somebody leaves, if faculty or staff, somebody wants their mail forwarded to their supervisor, they know how to do that. So maybe a quarter FTE, quarter of an FTE. I mean, it really, I used to joke all the time. It's like, you know, when I had the on-premise Exchange server, if I hovered my finger around the power on/off button, my phone would start vibrating. You know, it was like, okay, there's gonna be a problem with email. You know, we just don't have problems with email anymore. We lost power. You know, we're of course in Missouri. We had this huge blizzard-like storm a few years ago. Lost power to campus for over 24 hours. We still had email. I mean, that was nice.
Yeah, yeah. That and actually it helped your communication planning for the disaster because you didn't have to rely on the on-premise.
Right, right.
Yeah, awesome, awesome. Well, it looks like we have answered and addressed all of the questions that have been posed to you at this time. I do thank you for those thoughtful answers and for the consideration that you have given to this project. If we could we back up 2 slides? I just want to share the promotion again with our attendees. While he's backing up those first 2 slides, first we will do just a straight migration. That's promotion 1, and that is available for our attendees today only. And that promotion is migrating your mailboxes starting at $999, which is a great value. We will go through the processes of giving you reports, but ultimately migrating all of your mailboxes and assisting with that effort at $999 is one great value. The second promotion that was mentioned and shared for our attendees today was a migration that also includes an audit. And as Chad mentioned, this was the type of approach that he undertook for his institution. In that process, we will audit for you as we run the readiness reports and using the tools that are provided. We will make recommendations, but also do things such as identify critical or large size mailboxes, go through the processes of cleaning up the Active Directory structure, those precursor steps that are needed in order to ensure a successful and an easy migration. So these are 2 promotions that we have running at this time, and is available for all of the attendees today. If you have any questions or any follow-up that you would like for us to provide to you, please contact Jason Williams. His contact information is on the next slide, and his email address is available there. So his phone number is 844-476-8711, and he is available at extension 263, or you may email him at jason_williams@OculusIT.com. Chad, once again, I thank you for sharing your experience on migrating to Office 365 with our attendees today. And to our audience, I thank you for spending time with us this afternoon. We recognize your schedules are busy, and we thank you for spending some time with us. I hope that everyone has a great rest of day and a great week and an awesome summer. Thank you, and bye for now.